Car bombs detonated in the streets by factions of al-Qaeda and ISIS. Airstrikes from the Saudi-led coalition slammed targets aiming at Iranian-backed rebels. All sides killing civilians by the hundreds. Yemen, with its population of about 24 million people, teeters on the brink of a humanitarian disaster and total state collapse. Belkis Wille has recently returned from Yemen. She is the Yemen and Kuwait researcher for Human Rights Watch. She's here with me now in Toronto. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Let us first understand Yemen at its base. Let's bring up a map of Yemen. There it is, south to South Saudi Arabia next to Oman. It has been mired in war for 14 months now, so just over a year. Last February, the president flees the capital, Sana'a. A month later, Saudi Arabia enters, conducting airstrikes. Up to this point, in 14 months or so, the conflict's claimed more than 6,200 lives, and it's displaced 2.5 million people. Sounds pretty rotten, to be honest with you. And you lived in Yemen for 3.5 years. You left when the war broke out. You've been back several times, last time in the spring, in April. What's it like on the ground there right now?
Well, as you said, this war that's lasted 14 months has had such a dramatic effect on the country. It's important to point out that before this war began, there were multiple armed conflicts going on in Yemen, in different parts of the country by different actors. So it was by no means completely peaceful until this war began, but at least things were more stable than they are now. And this war has had such a dramatic and detrimental effect on the population, most notably because when the Saudi-led coalition began its bombing campaign, what they announced at the same time was a naval and aerial blockade. And that meant that they would restrict all shipments coming into the country. Yemen is a country that relies 90% on imports for food, for medicine, for fuel. And so the minute that Saudi Arabia announced this blockade, you saw this massive humanitarian crisis begin because of a fuel shortage, because of a food shortage, and because of medical shortage, because commercial goods simply haven't been getting into the country for the last year.
As I said in the introduction, there are so many actors, players involved in this. Is this a proxy war, a civil war, both? How would you describe this?
Well, I mean, the thing that really precipitated this conflict was the Houthis, a Shia militia group from the north of the country, coming in September of 2014, taking the capital by force, forcing the president to flee, as you said, early in the last year. And then he went to Saudi Arabia and called on the Saudi-led coalition to start bombing the country. There is a real question as to what extent this group, the Houthis, is supported by Iran, is a proxy of Iran. I think to call them simply a proxy of Iran is simplifying this conflict a lot. And it's not a conflict in which getting Saudi Arabia and Iran to sit down to the table and come up with a negotiated settlement would mean peace in Yemen. It is important to note that the Houthis, they have had an agenda in Yemen to take control for a very long time. The government of Yemen fought several wars against the Houthis between 2004 and 2009. The Houthis themselves say that their ancestors were the rulers of Yemen for 1,000 years until the 1960s. So they feel that this is their right to take back control. This is not a Tehran agenda. This is what they feel is very much their own agenda.
Okay, so Houthis involved, disputed how much Iran is backing them. You've got government forces loyal to President Hadi, supported by the Saudis and the U.S. Is that everyone that's involved here?
Well, unfortunately not. In addition to that, you have al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Al-Qaeda has had a long history in Yemen. They've used Yemen as a hub to locate themselves as a safe haven, and from there have conducted operations not only inside Yemen, but also abroad. Unfortunately, over this year, we've seen that a security vacuum has been created, one that al-Qaeda has been able to fill very effectively, particularly in the southeast of the country. 14 months after this war has begun, you see a much stronger body coming out of it. Al-Qaeda at the end of this war, if and when it ends, I don't think is going to be as willing to sort of retreat, hand back the weapons that it's gained over this period and simply say that they're happy to settle back to where they came from and not want a piece of the pie. We also suddenly have the emergence of the Islamic State in Yemen. Historically, that didn't exist. This was something that you saw in other countries, most notably, of course, Iraq and Syria. But suddenly you do have something called the Islamic State, or individuals saying that they're affiliated with the Islamic State, carrying out bombings and other attacks in Yemen.
This is complicated stuff.
Very.
Okay, I want to talk more about Saudi Arabia because, of course, our Saudi arms deal is controversial in this country. We'll talk more about that in a bit. But what is the Saudi interest here? In what ways is it supporting the president, Hadi? How are they doing this?
Well, once Hadi left the country with his cabinet, he fled to Saudi Arabia. He sits in Riyadh, and he called on this Saudi-led coalition to launch this bombing campaign in Yemen.
Airstrikes.
Airstrikes. So what you've had is 9 countries in this coalition led by Saudi Arabia. The war room sits in Riyadh. The spokesman of the coalition is a Saudi general. And they've been carrying out thousands and thousands of bombing campaigns over the last 14 months. The number that you cite of individuals that have been killed in this war, I think it's really more important to look at, of the number of people killed, how many are civilians? Out of 3,200 civilians killed, and that's the number given by the UN, and I think it is a good number to trust, 60% of those deaths are coming from airstrikes. So the majority of the deaths in this war really are coming from this bombing campaign led by Saudi Arabia. This is the main support that's being given to President Hadi, and I think if you talk to everyday Yemenis on the streets of Yemen, despite the fact that the international community still calls President Hadi the legitimate Yemeni president, many Yemenis would say, how can we have a president that has called on countries to bomb and kill our own people?
And a UN panel has accused the coalition of vast human rights violations, including the civilians that you talk about being killed in airstrikes. Is this coalition, the Saudi-led coalition, are they committing what amounts to war crimes?
Unfortunately, this is exactly what we've seen. And this UN report that you talk about, it was a panel of experts impaneled by the UN Security Council. They wrote a report that was leaked to the public in January of this year. And it very much married exactly the findings that I've been able to see on the ground. Human Rights Watch has documented 43 unlawful airstrikes. These were unlawful either because they were disproportionate or indiscriminate. We think several of them have amounted to war crimes.
What are they hitting?
Said as much. Well, I mean,
hospitals?
You name it. Hospitals, multiple times hospitals have been hit, including Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders hospitals. We've had schools hit. We've had marketplaces hit. The most recent really egregious attack that we saw, and I was able to go to the airstrike site several days after the event happened. It was a marketplace at noon, full of civilians. 2 bombs were dropped, U.S. bombs, because we were able to find the remnants and identify these as U.S.-made bombs, killing at least 97 civilians. And what we've seen, I think, across the board, and it very much captures the flavor of this bombing campaign and why you see so many civilians having been killed, is just this incredible level of recklessness, a lack of willingness on the side of the coalition to abide by this key principle of the laws of war. We need to always think about how we minimize civilian casualties with each strike.
What are the Americans doing? Where are they? They're involved in this. Well, how are they assisting? What's it doing? You mentioned their bombs.
Yes, so I mean, among other things, it's not simply a matter of them providing the weaponry for this war, and I might add that there's been a massive uptick, as one could probably imagine, in arms sales the longer that this war goes on, including with companies in the U.S. and the U.K. and other countries. But actually, the U.S. has gone quite a bit further. They are providing not only military intelligence to the war room in Riyadh, so that the war room can select targets to hit, but they're actually going further in providing targeting assistance. Now, under international law, if a state is providing targeting assistance, that actually makes them a party to the conflict. So we have said the United States is actually a party to this war. As such, when an airstrike that they're assisting in goes wrong, they have a legal obligation there to be investigating and holding accountable the commanders that carried out that strike.
Okay, you also just got back, I think today perhaps, or yesterday, from Ottawa. And you were talking to federal officials there about Canada's role in the region. And I want to talk about the Saudi arms deal, signed by the last government, but has really been plaguing the Trudeau government. Some people say it's, the government's first major scandal. So just to take us by way back, in 2014, the Harper government inks this $15 billion deal to sell weaponized military vehicles, LAV-3s, light armored vehicles. We saw them used, there they are, but similar ones used in Afghanistan. We sell them to Saudi Arabia for 15 years. One of the largest arms export contracts in our history, in Canada's history. Then fast forward to April 8th of this year, Foreign Affairs Minister Stéphane Dion signed off on the remaining permits for this deal. And basically saying, hey, there's not very many no human rights concerns. New government saying no human rights concerns. And this is something that was only recently uncovered. Now, take a look at the LAV on the screen there. That's the LAV. So it has a grenade launcher, a cannon, the turret, the top turret mounted machine gun. They weigh about 20,000 kilograms and can speed up to 100 kilometers an hour. And during the last federal election, Prime Minister Trudeau, not the Prime Minister at the time, but he did call these vehicles Jeeps. Tell me this, is there a significant risk, or let's just say risk, that these Canadian military vehicles could become weapons in the war in Yemen?
Yes, and here's why, and this is exactly what I was trying to raise in the meetings that I had in Ottawa. So you've had what largely at the beginning of this war has been an aerial campaign on the side of the coalition, but there was a full recognition from the beginning that wars like this cannot be simply won by air strikes, but you need fighting and boots on the ground, and so you did. Since the beginning of the war, have very small numbers of troops from different coalition partners in Yemen. But more and more what we've seen happening is a decision on the side of Saudi Arabia, particularly in July of last year, to start empowering, arming a newly reconstituted Yemeni military force. They brought sort of former military officers across the border from Saudi Arabia into southern Yemen. These individuals are being trained under a former military commander, an infamous one in Yemen's history, one that we at Human Rights Watch have been documenting committing abuses for many decades. And under his watch, this newly constituted military force has now been doing incursions back across the border into Yemen against the Houthis. Now, these forces are being trained, but also armed by the Saudis, and they are taking some kind of machinery across the border back with them. They are taking vehicles, they are driving across the border. Now, on my last trip when I was there in March and April, I was actually only a few kilometers from where these incursions were happening. And as I said, I can tell you there are troop movements across the border.
These LAVs?
I have no idea if these LAVs are going to be the ones used by them. I have no idea what type of vehicles they're using at the moment. The point is, as I understand it, the Canadian standard is not that this will happen, it is risk that this might happen. And I think given the troop movements that we're seeing, given the way that Saudi Arabia has behaved in the context of this war so far, I think the risk is high enough that any government should be extremely concerned about a deal like this going through at this point.
All right, I want to drill down on some of the things that the Canadian government has said, reasonings for this to go forward. But I should just say by way of background, a lot of our allies in the EU are saying, you know what, let's do an arms embargo to Saudi Arabia. I think the Belgians and the Dutch are refusing to sell arms at this point. And then Canada is taking its own position. So let me put a couple of things to you that our federal government is saying. They say that 3,000 Canadian jobs are depending on this deal. If the deal goes, so do the jobs.
I mean, I'm not an economist. I'm not an expert in sort of the economy of Canada. But I'd wonder as to whether these are the kind of, is the value of 3,000 jobs, and I wonder whether we know, does this mean 3,000 jobs throughout the entirety of this contract, or is it at any given point in the contract? That's a different question. But these 3,000 jobs, are they worth it if the next thing that we're going to see is a photo emerging with one of these Canadian LAVs crossing the border into Yemen with these armed forces on the back of it? I mean, I really don't know that the Canadian public is willing to pay that price.
I'm guessing your answer to that is no, it's not worth it.
Again, I think that's up to the Canadian public to decide, or to push their elected representatives to make that decision.
Okay, here's another reasoning from the government. They say if we go back on the deal, it's going to ruin Canada's international business reputation. A good reason?
I think, I mean, for one thing, as you rightly pointed out, this was a decision taken by a former government, and it was taken at a very different time. This war was not going on at that time. Saudi Arabia did not have the same record at that time. Right now, you've got a UN panel of experts report saying such dramatic things that have been documented against Saudi Arabia and the rest of the coalition. You've got a case in which, as you pointed out, the entire European movement, the European Parliament has called for there to be an arms embargo on Saudi Arabia specifically because of its behavior in this war. You've got countries in Europe blocking arms to Saudi Arabia. So this wouldn't be coming in a vacuum, and I think it would actually be a very understandable decision to take, and one that wouldn't look at all incongruous with the current circumstances.
The Liberals have signed further permits and stuff, picking up on the last government. I want to give you one or two more, we'll see about time, but reasons that our government is giving. Here's another one. It'll hurt our relationship with the Saudis. We have about 16,000 Saudi students studying here in Canada. And, this is about soft power. We can help appreciate, grow this appreciation of Canada. They take it back home, including things like our wonderful diversity, our gender equality. Good reason?
I mean, the lives of real people are at stake at the end of this. And I think one really needs to think in those stark terms. I have been on the ground in Yemen. What I have witnessed in terms of the human cost of this war is so incredibly high. And I think any country that has leverage right now over Saudi Arabia has to be using the most effective leverage that they have to stop these violations from happening. And if you have an arms deal right now, you have more leverage than any other country. And what you can say to Saudi Arabia is, we are under a lot of pressure from our own public for this deal not to go through. Therefore, you, Saudi Arabia, you need to show us something until we can greenlight this. Show us that when you carry out an attack that leads to deaths of civilians, you do carry out an investigation, you do hold some commander accountable, and you do compensate victims. That has not happened a single time in this war. Until that starts happening, no government can continue to greenlight these sales.
And another point, critics make is that Saudi Arabia is this country with vast misogyny, punishes dissidents in the worst possible way, kills them. What the heck are we doing over there? They say, why are we making deals with them?
Yes, which is a very fair point.
Okay, what has to be done? And it's a big question, but what do we have to do before the deal can be safely done, before Canada can say, we got all our assurances? I mean, you said the Saudis have to give some assurances. What would be okay for you? What boxes do we have to kind of tick off?
Well, for one thing, there could be a stronger push on the side of this government to say we want to see, for example, first of all, a clear agreement as to what these labs can and cannot be used for, right? And that has to be in writing and a clear agreement on that. And secondly, it can't simply be left to assurances. We've seen many cases in which the Saudis have been willing to give assurances and they haven't lived up to those assurances. So a monitoring mechanism would have to be put in place that the Canadian government would feel comfortable with, that would allow the Canadian government to know if indeed these labs end up getting used in a way that they shouldn't be used. If that happens, the final thing that I think the Canadian government needs to demand before this deal can go through is to see proof that a compensation mechanism has been established so that if these labs are used in an attack that leads to civilian casualties and an attack that is unlawful, that there is a mechanism in place that will lead to compensation for the victims. Until all of those boxes are ticked, I really don't see how the government can go through with this.
So when you're in Ottawa this week and you say all that to them, do you feel like you're listened to, heard?
I would say the positive response was there in these meetings. I do think that the government realizes that this, as you said, is looking like quite a black mark on the government. There's a lot of pressure on the foreign ministry in particular to try and remedy this as much as possible. I didn't sense that there's a willingness to stop the deal from going through, but I got the sense that there is a very strong interest in the side of the government on putting in place some types of checks and balances so as to try and ensure that these labs are not used in an improper way.
You're also, for Human Rights Watch, you also take care of Kuwait, if I can put it that way. There are UN-mediated peace talks going on in that country. Is that going to lead to peace there?
I think the problem with the peace talks that you have in Kuwait, despite the fact that they are meant to be carried out in tandem with a ceasefire in Yemen. And within hours of that ceasefire coming into effect, it was broken and there have been airstrikes and fighting on the ground consistently throughout. So that's already something that destabilizes negotiations. But the other big problem that I see is the fact that, yes, the Houthis are at the table in Kuwait. The Yemeni government that sits in Riyadh is in Kuwait. But then there's a plethora of other actors that are fighting on the ground in Yemen. Some very legitimate political players. For example, the Muslim Brotherhood Party of Yemen, which had the most significant popular backing. And if there had been elections before all of this happened, they would have gotten the vast majority of the popular votes. This party has not been invited to the talks. So if the two parties come home with some signed agreement and are asking the rest of Yemen to sign up to this new deal, I don't see groups like the Islah Party, the Muslim Brotherhood in Yemen, and other groups being willing to stomach what that deal is going to be. And I unfortunately can see that leading to more fighting on the ground.
I mentioned Syria. I don't like to do a hierarchy of tragedies in war, but the Syrian civil war has been going on for over more than 5 years now. Gets more attention, probably not enough, but more attention than the other conflicts in the region. 280,000 people, millions displaced, dead, and millions of others displaced out of Syria. How do you get attention for the Yemens of the world when we're so focused, or maybe not even enough, but we are more focused on Syria?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I think one of the key reasons, because I don't think, if you look at sort of the humanitarian crisis and the level of the crisis, the situation in Yemen is probably as dramatic or even worse. You know, the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross came to Yemen 5 months into the war, and he said 5 months of war in Yemen looks like 5 years after the war began in Syria. I mean, that's how dramatic the war has been there. And yet, as you said, it gets very little attention. And I think the main reason for that is because Yemen has two land borders that have been closed since the first day of the war. And then there's an ocean, and it's very hard for Yemenis to make that route out. So the Yemenis are not showing up on the shores of Europe, whereas the Syrians are. And that's why Syrians are able to get the story out so much more effectively. And I think the rest of the world hears what Syrians have to say about this, of their conflict. But Yemenis really don't have the ability to talk to the outside world. It is such an isolated country, and it always has been. It's a tough battle that we've been fighting for the last year, and it really is hard to get attention to this conflict.
Well, thank you for bringing it, more readily to our attention. Be safe when you go back there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.